Hello everybody, welcome to this webinar on 3GPP Release 18, Opportunities for Industry Verticals. A very warm welcome to you. We have a smashing lineup of panelists this afternoon, from the TSG chairs of 3GPP to 5 industry associations across the verticals. So let me introduce you first of all to our panelists, and then I'll give you a little bit of background information about this webinar series. So first up will be Georg Mayer, who is TSG SA chairman, and then Balazs Bertenyi, who is the chairman for RAN in 3GPP. Then we'll move on to the 5G Automotive Association with Maxime Flament, who is the CTO, and he will be joined by Markus Mueck, who's from Intel, and also from Antonio Consoli, Huawei. They are both members of the 5GIA, and they'll be bringing in multiple perspectives. Then we'll hear from Michael Bahr, who works for Siemens. He is a member of the 5G ACIA, so that is the 5G Alliance for Connected Industry and Automation. And then we'll listen to Julian Stafford. Julian is Technical Director of the European Utilities Telecom Council and a new member of 3GPP, and he will be joined by Erik Guttman from Samsung to give their perspectives and their experiences on why and how they chose 3GPP as the place to push their standards in for energy and utilities. And then we'll be hearing from Jordi Gimenez, who is part of the 5G Media Action Group, or 5G MAG. And then our final panelist will be Professor Dr. Christoph Thuemmler, who is a clinician at the Helios Park Klinikum in Leipzig in Germany, and a founder of the 5G Health Association. So just let me give you an introduction about the background to the series. So this series is organized by 4 market representation partners of 3GPP, the 5G Automotive Association, 5G ACIA, the 5G Infrastructure Association, and Public Safety Communication Europe. And here I have to give an apology from Dr. David Lund, who was initially coming on to co-chair this webinar, but who is unavailable this afternoon. So the idea behind this webinar series started with a series of workshops in 2019 to help all verticals come into 3GPP and drive their requirements. So it's not just restricted to our own associations, but it goes much more broadly beyond that. 5G MAG and 5G Health Association are 2 very good examples of this. And these are some of the people behind it. So we also create a strong link also with 3GP, and because it's European driven, with ETSI as well. You can find more information on the on the slide decks that will be made available after the webinar. And just a thank you in advance, because we'll be launching a few live polls throughout the webinar this afternoon. So thank you very much for your inputs there. And now I'll pass the floor to Georg Mayer, who will give us some insights into SA and Release 18 for industry verticals. So I'll stop sharing now, Georg, and the floor is yours. And I think just before, while Georg's getting ready, John, I think we can launch the very first poll. It's a really short one. And it's just really asking you if you're already personally involved in 3GPP. So you have 3 choices: yes, no, but interested in becoming involved, and we strongly recommend that, of course. No, and you don't have plans at this particular time. So please go ahead and cast your votes. Yes, most of you are. So 48% of you are personally involved in 3GPP, and the others, but we have 20% interested in becoming involved, so that's great. So I'm going to stop sharing this result now and pass the floor to Georg. Thank you very much.
So I give a quick introduction into what's happening on Release 18 in 3GPP SA. Balazs will go on then about the RAN side of 3GPP. In order to look at Release 18, we have to understand what's the status of Release 17 in 3GPP. So we're working now on Release 17 in all working groups in 3GPP. And the study items in SA2, they will be completed in next week's meeting, or at least to a large scale completed. And then we'll start on work items like normative work from the first quarter of 2021 on. There's a typo there. So then the release 18 studies on requirements, that is the very first step we are working. We always work requirements, architecture, and protocols. The requirements we work already on in SA1, and they are progressing towards completion. Those are the studies. So we first do a study in requirements, and then we do the work items on requirements, and then we go into the architecture. So practically the very first step in release 18 specification is going towards completion. We have already quite a high number of release 18 items in SA1. And there are some delegates who propose to close the door. So practically saying we should not have more release 18 requirements in SA1. This has not been decided yet. There will be a discussion next week. And I'm pretty sure that we can keep the door a bit more open, but this will depend on the discussions. For release 18, also all over 3GPP, we have no firm timeline agreed. And also for release 17, we will need to discuss the timeline again. I just want to stress again, for the releases since release 16, so more or less since 3 or 4 years, we have now in 3GPP included a broad variety of vertical features. We discussed a number of improvements to 3GPP processes in order to make life for verticals easier and more approachable in 3GPP. For some things, we already progressed pretty far in these improvements. Some are still on the go. And from my perspective, also when you see this presentation now, you will see there is the verticals in 3GPP are quite successful. And the current processes that we have, all in all, they work well. They are not the easiest one to follow, I agree on that, but still it seems they guarantee a certain amount of quality and also, well, give success to those who are working along them. So next week is important for us. We have the plenary meetings run as ACT, and one of the major things we will discuss is how long we want to shift the release 17 timeline. So currently, we would have a deadline in September, but that most likely will shift, or we already agreed to shift it. We just don't know how long we will shift it. For release 18, we will have a number of new study items in SA1 that will be approved. We will see this later. And release 18 handling in SA1 will also be discussed. What I said before, should we close the door or not for new items. So the following slides now, there I assume we shift by 6 months, the release 17 schedule. That is at least one of the proposals that is under discussion. From my perspective, it's very likely, but of course, I cannot promise you that this will be the way that we will go. So if we will do that, then you see here on the left side, the timeline for release 17. And that means then that this has impact on the release 18 schedule as well. So for example, the architecture work in SA2 for release 18 will start in June 2021 if we go with this shift as proposed here for release 17. And then in June 2021, RAN will also start its discussion on content prioritization and timeline decisions. So in December 2021, practically a year from now, we will foreseeably have decisions on a timeline for release 18 and for the content of release 18. And then at that point, we would start the requirements work on release 19. And here now you see a list in the next 2 slides of the release 18 study items and also 1 or 2 work items that we have already that that we have for SA1 and SA6. These are the two groups that currently work on release 18 items. And you see, I have highlighted in blue those where the verticals are either, where it's the feature itself is either completely vertical related, or where verticals have a very strong interest in to push these issues forward because they are related to them, like slicing or like SPA, that is our API interface. So you see here again a variety of items that we have already, like it's for the railways, it's for personal IoT networks, so Internet of Things, timing resilience system, that is for the manufacturing part of the verticals, I think very important. Mission critical issues, smart energy and infrastructure is also in here. And then on the next slide, you see we provide the localized service access, the northbound APIs, this is the SPA, and other issues in SA6 also related to railways and mission critical. So you see for release 18, the verticals already have quite a good standing and have lots of issues in the discussion. So for this workshop, I would suggest that we really focus the discussion on release 18 and release 18 requirements. Don't go in what can we still do for release 17, that has gone. And also, let's not again discuss the processes in 3GPP. We did this for the last 2 or 3 meetings already, but I would say this is maybe not the right time and place this time to do this. And then also we can have a look on how verticals could better prepare for release 19. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Georg. Yeah, very interesting. We'll move on to Balazs Bertenyi now, and then we'll perhaps take a couple of questions at the end before we move on to the verticals. So the floor is yours, Balazs. Thank you.
So first of all, welcome all of you to this very informative webinar, and thank you, Stephanie, for having us with Georg. So as Stephanie said, I'm Balazs Bertenyi, and I'm the chairman of 3GPP RAN, that's the radio group within 3GPP. And let me just start by putting a figure up exactly about what Georg was talking about on the timeline and the expectations, so that you can visually see what is likely to happen. Now, what you see here in red is, as Georg said, is the very likely adjusted timeline that we will come to at our upcoming plenary meeting next week. So that represents a 6-month shift for obvious reasons, and that would put the stage 3 freeze of release 17 to March 2022. Now, taking that as a basis, and from past experience and past doings of how releases follow each other, we normally, on the radio side, approve a new package for the new release when we finalize the RAN 1, so that's the physical layer work of the previous release. So that would essentially, if we look at December 2021 here, where release 17 RAN 1 would be frozen, that would put the package approval of release 18 on the RAN side to that very same meeting, to December. Now, in terms of that work package, that normally takes at least 3, but most of the time 6 months to bring the industry together, to understand what each segment, operators, vendors, verticals, chipset makers, etc., are looking at for the new release. So we normally on the RAN side have like a big bang type of workshop 6 months ahead of the planned package approval. So that's what you see here, release 18 RAN workshop for June 2021. So that's 6 months from now. This is all very much in the making still. So none of this is confirmed. But again, it's the most realistic scenario going forward, and hence is the scenario I think you all should be planning with when trying to consolidate your inputs and your plans for 3GPP and for release 18. Now, in terms of the work itself for release 18, it will start once the package is approved in RAN. So it will start from January 2022 onwards. And typically our releases go from 15 to 18 months in length. Now with release 17, we're ending up actually with a longer release for, again, for obvious reasons. We had to do these shifts because of the pandemic, but I would expect that we go back to normal release length and normal release rhythm once life goes back close to normal. So we expect a 15 or 18 month long release 18 length. Now, moving forward on what actually are the key areas on the RAN side that we are working on in release 7 and our potential areas also for release 18 going forward. So mobile broadband and enhanced mobile broadband, that has been our bread and butter for decades essentially. And I do expect that we are going to continue working on enhancing and improving and optimizing what we have in terms of performance, coverage, power saving, etc. So that will likely continue in some sense. Now it's important to remember that those changes and enhancements are motivated by mobile broadband, but are very much applicable also to the entire 5G platform, and hence also to vertical functionalities. I would expect that we need to still do some enhancements for industrial IoT related functionality, potentially some things around unlicensed spectrum. Now, unlicensed spectrum is the operation in unlicensed spectrum is something where the bulk of the work has actually been done in release 16. And we don't actually want to do any unlicensed specific enhancements in the future. We essentially assume that everything we do on our 5G platform henceforth is also applicable for unlicensed operation. Now, if there's any use case specific amendments we need to do, we will do that. But that's the generic principle going forward with unlicensed spectrum. One of the major success stories, at least on the RAN side, but I believe in the whole of 3GPP, is how the satellite access has been integrated into the 5G platform. A big chunk of that work is being done for release 17 now, and I do expect that we're going to have to continue with that in some shape or form, also in release 18, expanding on the satellite capabilities. Now, going to the right side of this picture, artificial intelligence is perhaps the biggest buzzword in the tech industry altogether going forward, and that's going to be true also for 3GPP in some sense. So we're going to have to look at how some of the artificial intelligence components can be used, especially in the network in terms of optimizing how the network operates. As our networks get more and more complex, we really need to make maximum use of what's out there with AI. Now, that's not to say that 3GPP is going to go into standardizing AI and AI algorithms, but we're going to have to make sure that the data that the different AI algorithms use is readily available from the different components of the network. Device expansion, that's again about the versatility of 5G, getting more and more device types integrated into the 5G platform. We're now looking at wearables, so simpler, reduced capability devices, but also like very specialized devices like industry sensors, etc. So that's an area where I assume we're going to have to further work on also in release 18. Extended reality is perhaps the biggest buzzword, at least on the commercial side for 5G. We have a sincere hope that there is actually not a whole lot we need to do because the platform supports what AR and VR needs per se, but we're still analyzing that and trying to understand that to a great extent. Multicast is also a new element in release 17. We're going to have to see if multicast work can be completed in its entirety, or we're going to have to look at further expanding on that. And last but not least, all the different learnings from deployments, and not only mobile broadband and operator deployments, but the very initial vertical deployments. We're very interested to hear some of the industry use cases, factory use cases, how those went and what are the learnings and what are the experiences, and feed that back into the standards process. Now, this represents the work areas we're currently aware of, but I very much assume that with release 18, there's going to be brand new work areas not even remotely visible on this picture. And that's where you come in, and how that would actually be brought in So the key next steps for all of you is, first and foremost, as Georg also said, focus on formulating your key requirements. Then try to streamline them, not only within your sort of small group of industry segment players, but also across verticals. The more verticals you can streamline your requirements across, the better the chances it will make it in the platform. So find your friends, find your like-minded verticals and operators as well. Like if I look at the satellite community, how they went about entering 3GPP and getting their requirements across, they have actually gotten a very good support from the traditional cellular community as well. So try to look at the entire landscape of 5G players and 3GPP players and try to find as much commonality as you can with as many of them as possible. Now, the third step here is to try to consolidate the plan of how you develop your features. Now, there's a key difference with how the cellular business dynamics has shaped up over the last couple of decades and how we have seen potentially the vertical dynamic shaping up. Typically in a cellular feature development arena, you would have incremental development from release to release. So you start with a small nucleus, you add on to it, you add further enhancements, etc. And that has served the cellular community and the ecosystem quite well. Now with the verticals, we much more see an all-in-one-go type of attitude, and rightly so, because you're actually looking at replacing your communications machinery all in one go. So you actually need all the functionality that allows you to do that. So you can't really start with a small nucleus and then build on it, because you're actually going to lose functionality compared to what you have today with a wired system, for example, with Ethernet, for example. So what you should try to look at and understand and propose is which one of these basic development plans suit you more. So if you're looking at an all-in-one go, then you're going to have to probably start with a study item phase spanning at least one release, but maybe 2 releases, where you look at all the different elements and try to conclude on the basic technology on all of them. And then once that holistic study is done, you would do the normative work in a follow-on release. So again, these are things that you'd have to look at and try to understand. And once that is understood, then prepare streamlined presentations. As Georg said, we tentatively are planning for a workshop. So December would be the final or the package approval, and the workshop would be then June. So you have another 6 months essentially for the first 4 steps there. And then between June and December, there's going to be all kinds of discussions in industry to try to come to a workable package in terms of size, in terms of technical content, etc. So that's essentially these are the key steps going forward.
We've got a couple of questions, one actually for Georg, and it was one of the participants would like to know if you could tell us why you specifically mentioned SA1 and SA6 as the initial activities in SA.
Right, so SA1 is for most of the vertical requirements, or for most of the requirements in 3GPP, the entry point. And that is really, as I said, for the requirements only. So this gives more of a user-specific or usability-specific, service-specific view. And then only in the second step, architecture, we look at the architecture in SA2, we're looking on the security issues, on the security of the whole feature in SA3 and so on. So we split the work then into the different components of our network and into the different logical functions of our network. That is done for RAN, this is done for SA. And then in the third step, we define the actual protocol, which we call then stage 3. So requirements is stage 1, architecture stage 2, and protocol is stage 3, roughly spoken. And therefore, usually all the new ideas enter SA1. But in SA6, the verticals have a special home, and we have a good tradition in nearly all working groups that if you bring in something new that is maybe not completely a new feature that you want to market, but an extension of an existing feature, then you can also, to a certain extent, do that in the related stage 2 or even stage 3 group. So this is why we start certain railway and certain mission critical enhancements directly from SA6. There's a very rough outline. There's more to say on that, but I hope this sort of answers the question in a first step. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Georg. In fact, we'll be listening to the vertical industries in a short while, so we can draw on their personal experiences as well. So thank you. And Balazs, there's been a lot of, I've heard a lot about the importance of avoiding creating silos, and you mentioned, for example, the satellite example, which I think is a super one, and we have them represented also in the 5G Infrastructure Association pre-standardisation working group, which I actually co-chair. So this is good to see this success in 3GPP. But if you could probably expand a little bit on why it's so important to avoid the silos and how we can make sure that the vertical industries do avoid doing that when they become part of 3GPP.
So that is an excellent question, Stephanie. So a fundamental part of the 5G vision, and that's also what we try to follow in standardization, is to have one common 5G platform, one common set of hardware capabilities and at least physical layer. And then the difference is the differentiation, the add-on functionality of the different use cases and specific verticals would come in at the higher layer with software. And that allows the ecosystem to build on an economies of scale. So everybody, all the players and segments would actually get a chipset, and they would basically get the opportunity to truly buy into the sort of the 5G platform in its entirety. Now, if we created silos, as unfortunately was the case with some of the 4G components back in the day, you might actually get the chance to complete the standardization quicker because you're doing it with your friends. And you don't actually have to confer and consolidate with all the other parts of the ecosystem. So you might be able to be more successful on paper, but then the standards that you create won't actually translate into actual products because nobody's going to manufacture a chipset for a vertical that requires 10,000 chipsets worldwide. That's just not economical. So what we're really looking at is one common basic platform that is common for the commercial, the industry, and all the potential usages of the 5G platform, so that we can actually make sure that all of this is commercially successful and not just successful in the standards arena.
Okay, thank you very much, Balazs. I'll pass the floor now to my colleague, John, who will introduce our next panelist. Thank you, John.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. I hope you can all hear me. We'll now begin the session in which we begin to hear from individual industry verticals with their viewpoints and their technical requirements. And we're going to start with the automotive industry, where we have the 5G AA, represented by its CTO, Maxime Flament, and some of his colleagues who will provide expert opinions on this. That's Markus Mueck from Intel and Antonio Consoli from Huawei. And I believe Ali will also be joining us as an expert there. So now I'll turn the floor over to Maxime and colleagues.
Thank you very much, John. So I'm very happy to be here. And as said by Stephanie earlier, this group has been convening a few times in the past in order to discuss how verticals can really make a substantial contribution to the 3GPP process and make sure that the needs of the industries that we represent are clearly heard and followed up in the 3GPP mechanism, standardization mechanism. And I really thank the 3GPP for putting these together and making sure that we have a voice in the whole process. So 5G Automotive Association is a relatively big association, but still relatively young. We are 4 years old. We were created by 8 founding companies, and the intention originally was really to put the automotive and telecommunication industries together and address end-to-end connectivity for different aspects, but mainly looking at eventual automated driving functions, connected services, and also the integration of intelligent transport systems. And very quickly we picked up in speed. We were very quickly becoming MRP towards 3GPP. The first V2X standards came with release 14 back in April 2017, and that really kicked off our collaboration with both what we call short range and long range communication. So side link on one side, making sure that vehicles connect to each other, but as well that we use all the capabilities of the mobile networks. We are today 130 members, and we tackle all aspects of cellular V2X, from technology to all the way to go-to-market strategies. Over the years, we just looked from a very broad point of view what 5G should do in order to make connected mobility a reality. We all look at this from an interoperable, deployable, secure end-to-end connectivity solution, and we tackle all these priorities areas in parallel with the different working groups that we have, the 7 working groups that I'm going to illustrate in the next slide. We look at trust in terms of security and privacy. We look at the integration of the road infrastructure and digital roads. We looked at the integration of the pedestrian, cyclists, what we call vulnerable road users, especially enabling smart devices to connect with the vehicles. In the questions in the chat box, there was a lot of enthusiasm around positioning. Obviously, for us as a vehicular communication, we also need very precise positioning, and we need to capitalize on the radio access technology to provide that. Further, we want to make sure that mobility services are already fast-tracked by the current cellular network. We look at the flexible service architectures in terms of distributed cloud and edge computing capabilities. And then the last one at the bottom here is related to the making sure that we sustainably evolve the technology. And Balazs was mentioning the all on one go. And obviously, from our point of view, we did not go in one go for the full specifications, but we wanted to then follow up release after releases. And before I hand over to our the working group chair of the working group 4, Markus Mueck, I wanted to illustrate that we have many different working groups, 7 working groups, and under these working groups we have many different work items. And Markus is going to illustrate what are the mechanisms between the work items, and then how it eventually leads to suggestions into 3GPP. So Markus, thank you very much for taking this task. And then I hand over to you with the next 2 slides.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Maxime. And thanks everybody for this invitation. So as Maxime mentioned, I will really take the hat of the chairman of the working group on standards and spectrum. So what's important is that 5GAA has really a long-standing relationship with 3GPP, as you probably know. And we have been, in particular, been using the tool of liaison statements in order to provide the inputs directly from the connected automotive industry into 3GPP work. And here are just a couple of bullet points on such liaison statements that we had exchanged in the past. And I think we have been collaborating very constructively with each other, in particular related to the release 17 and sidling enhancements. And also we have been collaborating, I think, very efficiently in the context of SA and RAN prioritization. So obviously we fully acknowledge that it's not sufficient to only send liaison statements to 3GPP. We also need to have the experts in the groups participating actively. Of course, I think we very well understood, and we are encouraging our members to be actively engaging within 3GPP. And I think over the last months and also years, I mean, this situation has definitely improved. And I mean, just to let you know, 5GAA plans to further use these mechanisms in order to contribute to release 18. And to give you just a quick heads up on what's coming, I would like to ask Maxime to switch to the next slide, please. Yeah. So we felt it is important for you to first of all let you know which topics are currently in the focus of 5GAA. So we have here an exhaustive list on the right-hand side. And we really want to highlight 4 items which we believe will have a direct impact into 3GPP, and in particular in release 18. So the first one relates to edge computing in the automotive context. And here we are looking, for example, into multi-operator support in an edge environment. The next one relates to teleoperated driving. So, and here we are looking at certain architectural solutions in order to enable such services. Then we have an item called NRI, so network reselection improvements. Also, this is something that we intend to take into 3GPP. And then finally, you may have been aware that we did a first study on spectrum needs, focusing on the most basic services and requirements, and we are currently extending this study by taking into account more advanced services, and that will translate into a release 2 of the spectrum needs study, and I expect that it will be published later next year. So and now we want to take the opportunity to give a bit of a deep dive into a topic which we have been studying also in detail in 5GAA, and that relates to predictive QS. And with that, I would hand over to my colleague. Thank you.
Yeah, so Antonio Consoli from Huawei will present that. Predictive quality of service, which has been already discussed in 3GPP, but I let him deep dive, as you say, Markus, giving more information and how relevant it is for release 18.
Thank you very much, Maxime, for this opportunity. And I'm proud to show the results of the work that 5GAA has done over the last 2+ years in this topic, which is predictive QoS, which involved many companies, including also 5 major OEMs and several, including also global mobile network operators. I am pretty sure that most of you attending this workshop are familiar with the topic of quality of service. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the topic of predictive quality of service. We know that 5G has a very powerful mechanism in order to deliver guaranteed quality of service. However, there are some exceptional situations in which the network may not always be able to guarantee what is the required quality of service. And we know how quality of service is important for verticals and especially for automotive applications. And we also know how much analytics is is becoming an important part of the network as 3GPP is progressing its work. So here it's important to understand that it will be very beneficial for the applications to use analytics actually to know beforehand when it is likely that the quality of service that it is experiencing may change. And that's actually possible thanks to analytics. And these notifications basically will provide the application enough time to trigger suitable countermeasures in order to avoid or prepare for undecided situations that may happen whenever the quality of service may change. So now what we are seeing in the slides is the result of the requirements that 5GAA has identified for predicted quality of service. We already have an existing solution in the 3GPP available since 3GPP release 16, which is also known as QoS Sustainability Analytics. And that solution is already used in the V2X solution. However, in order to make this solution more mature and suitable for the automotive applications that are envisaged for the future, 5GAA has worked on this solution in order to basically come up with additional requirements that will basically enhance the maturity of such solution. And the first requirement that actually we see now in the slide is the introduction of the notice period, because applications may use of these notifications about predicted potential QoS changes only if those notifications are actually received within a certain time frame from the event. This because implementing countermeasures, especially for an automotive application, when such notification is received, may require some time. We need to understand that sometimes automotive applications also have an impact on the way the vehicles are driven and also on the way the vehicles actually make use of such information. So the first requirement actually that we have identified in the work items that dealt with this topic is the introduction of a notice period. Also, actually, these requirements, as you may see, are actually pretty much technical and very detailed. So I expect actually questions that we can take in the second part of the workshop. The second requirement is related actually to what happens when the network is predicting a non-fulfillment of a guaranteed bitrate QoS flows. So we know that there is a mechanism for the quality of service mechanism in the 3GPP network to guarantee a set of specific KPIs. And basically, right now, the current solution gives the application the information of when this type of QoS, this guaranteed bitrate QoS, may change. However, because of the information that is collected in order to actually predict this event, is actually missing more details about what exactly is not going to be guaranteed. So it could be a KPI related to latency, it could be related to the bitrate, or it could be related to other things. Then basically it would be important to achieve a finer level of detail about what could be the cause of the GBR unfulfillment. The third requirement is actually related to improving the granularity of the prediction. This because predictions, in order to be used by the applications, need to be related exactly to the context of the application. And right now, the way the solution is working in release 16 can produce predictions that are statistically valid for all the UEs within a specific cell, within a specific region, but may not take into account the spatial configurations that a specific UE, that a specific vehicle may be in a specific time frame. And this is why it is important that we provide to the enabler that is responsible for making predictions additional information in order actually to take this specific context about a specific UE, a specific terminal into account. The fourth point is about increasing the quality of the information that we deliver. We have a threshold mechanism which provides information about right now about which is the actual threshold that is closed. So this means that when a notification is sent by the 3GPP network to the application, it actually says that the quality of service of a specific KPI will be within 2 predefined thresholds that the application has already set. So, for example, the quality of service will be between medium and good, or could be between good and very good. However, it would be important sometimes in order to make decisions on the application side on this notification that is received, also to have more qualified analytics information. For example, the CDF function or the actual expected KPI value that the network may predict for a specific QoS flow in a specific context. And then basically also in order to achieve this finer granularity and this finer level of information, it's important actually to feed more input data to the analytics enabler. And WDIF is the analytics enabler that T3GPP has identified for this additional functionality. And this is basically it's important that we can feed more information to the enabler in order to achieve this new functionality. And also it's important to complement this information also with the handover events. Can I ask Maxime actually to switch to the next slide? Thank you. So the next slide actually, while the first requirements in the first slide are actually summarizing what could be achieved by enhancing the current solution, 5GIA has actually brought forward the study and identified a number of potential requirements which may be fitting in this existing solution or may probably require a new notification mechanism. And I will not go into all the details also for the sake of time, but one important requirement is that we are able to send QoS predictions notification directly to the UE, because right now we have a notification mechanism that which the 3GPP system uses to notify the AIF, and then the AIF can actually send this notification to the UE, the terminal. And also, basically, the others are related to how we actually use this QoS prediction. So we can use it to predict future QoS demands. We can use it in order for the application to project several alternative routes and basically make a decision on the routing on how a vehicle wants to reach a specific point, depending on what is the requested QoS of the network, and also complementing the information that we currently feed in the analytics enabler in order to provide also predictions that are related to the side link, because currently the side link is not in scope for the existing solution. And with here, I will interrupt my presentation and I'll hand over back to Maxime.
Thank you, Antonio. And the deep dive on predictive quality of service was really there to illustrate the kind of inputs that we are giving to 3GPP. Now we did not have time to cover on other work items that were listed by Markus, but we can expect that many other work items will then provide its own feedback and hopefully continue its journey inside 3GPP.
Thank you very much, Maxime, Markus and Antonio, for a very interesting presentation. And predictive QoS is a common requirement across many different vertical industries. So the floor is now yours, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon, everyone on the call. My name is Michael Bahr. I'm with the slides. Yes, I'm with Siemens Technology in Munich in Germany, and I'm here. I'm representing 5GSCR. I'm the working group chair of working group 1, which is conveniently called use cases and requirements, also rapporteur of work items within 5GSCR, which are related to 3GPP SA1 and use cases and requirements. Also, or furthermore, I am or have been the rapporteur of the CyberCAV and FSE-CAV work items in release 17. These are the work items for the industrial requirements here, meaning especially industrial automation requirements. This is just a brief overview of 5GSC, and here you see also working group 1 use cases and requirements. What I would like to point out is that 5GSC has a long well, rather long relationship with 3GPP. In 2018, 5GSCR was approved as 3GPP marketing representation partner, and we have been involved with, in the vertical requirements work since 2018 with the beginning of release 16 and a little bit also at the end of release 15. So there's already 4 years and there have been many things happening. There are a few press releases, one is mentioned here, and there's also a little video on a panel discussion where Georg and a few representatives of verticals have been discussing the process of working in 3GPP as a vertical. 5GSCR also provided evaluation models or models in general to 3GPP, like a channel model for industrial environments and also a simulation model for industrial use cases. Here you see a more detailed view on what we actually provided to 3GPP SA1 as industrial requirements, and maybe a word beforehand about how 5GSCR is actually doing contributions to 3GPP. You will not find the contribution where the source is 5GSCR. So all the contributions from 5GSCR are actually done by the 5GSCR members who are also 3GPP members like Siemens, Bosch, but also Nokia, Ericsson, and others, all the people, all the companies and members you have seen here and there. So what is maybe the thing which qualifies to be a contribution by 5GSCR is that there's a common understanding about these contributions within 5GSCR, that they are driven by work done in 5GSCR, that they discussed within 5GSCR. As shown at the beginning, there's a specific work item in order to do this, to discuss contributions to 3GPP SA1 within the scope of 5GSCR, and involve also operational companies who are not participating in the 3GPP standardization process. So here you see the major specifications and documents. There are 2 major specifications, 22261, the service requirements for the 5G system, where general requirements and capabilities get into it, and then the specific requirements for the industrial automation area. These are in TS 22104, and it's not just industrial automation, but it's sort of this kind of functionality with ultra low latency and high reliability communication. So there are also use cases there or requirements from the medical area, also from the audio video production, which are related to this kind of use cases. There are also accompanying studies in release 16 and in release 17, 22804 and 22832. One little disclaimer. So these are 3GPP documents, so they are focusing on the work in 3GPP. And of course, 3GPP has to find out in a dialogue what is needed in order to provide the use cases by the verticals, and also what is possible by the physics and the general structure of the and general status of the 5G system. So in the end, these requirements documents are the requirements for a certain release on the 5G system. They might be a little bit short to the requirements of the use cases, and hopefully they're improved in later releases. So what is now about release 18 requirements? Many industrial requirements are actually included in release 16 and 17, and the industrial companies would be very happy to have everything ready to use, which is already required in release 16 and 17. So there is no need for an extensive release 18 study or technical report in 3GPP SA1 in order to collect further industrial use cases and further industrial requirements. But there's one issue which would be nice, that's traceability and tracking of vertical requirements in stage 2 and 3. That would be very good in order to see where all these requirements went into and what is actually specified in order to support these. And of course, there's still something to do. Let's have a look at this timeline and extend it to release 18. A few small enhancements will be necessary, which will then of course, go into the corresponding release 18 specifications 261 and 104. And these little small specific enhancements will be the industrial requirements that have not been selected in the release 17 SA prioritization, for instance, the fully decentralized DSN configuration model, and also the generalized concept for a PROSE or side link, which is then usable in different vertical domains. If you remember, or if you have been involved, there was a lot to do for release 17, and SA really had to prioritize the work. So there are some release 17 requirements from the industrial domain, which needed to be postponed to release 18. As Balazs explained, it's sort of an incremental process, so this is not really a problem as long as this incremental process continues. Of course, right now we are in the process of testing or getting the devices for release 15 and starting to test the actual 5G networks. So these tests and these experience with the first deployments will also maybe point out a few things which are missing and should be specified with some further requirements. And as I mentioned, the work in release 16 started 2017, 4 years ago. And of course, the time is not standing still, also not in the industry or in industrial factories. So there are a few new use cases which evolve with the evolvement of the technology and new capabilities in the factory. Another topic for small enhancements is actually the actual work in 5G RCR. There's, for instance, the 5G network exposure interface. There will be a second version of the white paper being published in March. There might be something coming out. There's also now work starting on looking at industrial 5G devices. This might also provide some specific requirements in order to support industrial 5G devices within the 5G system. And there might be, of course, further contributions to evaluation models in the process. So what this will be is small specific enhancements to requirement specifications, and would be good if in the discussions in December, this opportunity will be kept open for release 18 to have non-time consuming small improvements to the release 18 specifications. And with this, I would like to thank Stephanie for this opportunity and finish my talk. The next slide is actually the questions for the discussion later on with the TSG chairs. So far, a brief input for release 18 requirements from the industrial domain.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. So without further ado, we'll pass on to Julian Stafford from EUTC and Erik Guttman from Samsung. So the floor is yours, Julian. Thank you.
I'm Julian Stafford. I work for EUTC as the technical director, and also for JRC, the joint radio company here in the UK, which is a similar UK focused entity. So EUTC is part of a large global group, which was established originally in 1948, operates on a global basis, Africa, South America, North America, and so on, and of course here in Europe. And our job is to represent the interests of specific utility requirements in the domain of international regulators such as ITU, ETSI, CEPT, and so on as well. Our members are taken from really very, very large utilities all across Europe. You'll see some household names there: Alliander in Holland, Enedis and EDF in France, Iberdrola in Spain, of course, EDP in Portugal. And we have major engagements with ETSI, ITU and the World Economic Forum and other organisations as well. So thinking now more specifically about 3GPP and 5G engagement, it would be true that the utility sector has been somewhat late to the party. There are various reasons for this. We know that the utility sector represents a very significant untapped opportunity from the perspective of business cases and use cases and so on. But of course, the utility sector is phenomenally risk averse and is very heavily regulated. And so it's quite difficult in many instances to actually drive changes forward in this sector, and it can be rather slow. So specific requirements in utility telecommunications, there are synergies here with some things that are required in, say, the emergency services sector, the broadcast sector, or even the automotive sector. But you'll see these things are typified by very high availability, black start power autonomy, requiring these systems to work, of course, when there's no mains energy for 3 or 4 days in the worst case. Low latency, cybersecurity requirements, coverage, and of course traffic prioritization, which we've just heard about in the automotive sector. And the long-term solution, utilities don't want something they have to swap out every 4 or 5 years. That doesn't really work very well for us. And our current solutions used to deliver this type of connectivity, there's a lot of self-provide capability in there. Self-provide often because best effort services from consumer grade products and networks simply weren't good enough for utilities. So as power line carrier, self-provide fiber, copper networks, of course, which are being discontinued, and satellite systems as well. Quite a lot of microwave network as well. But beyond there, you can see at the bottom, existing 2G, 3G MNO connections, and some self-provide 2G, 3G, and now 4G networks coming into play as well. Particularly if you're in a country where the utility sector has been fortunate enough to gain its own dedicated spectrum. So in Ireland, ESB are starting on that journey. PGE in Poland are doing the same. And of course, in Germany, we're expecting announcements relatively soon from the regulator there. But the challenge we've got, if you can see in the yellow highlighted text there, the reason that we're really having to consider how we enhance services being delivered through LTE-based solutions is this drive towards distributed energy and distributed resources, which is aligned very closely with climate change objectives from the United Nations and so on, which means that we're going to have orders of magnitude increase in connectivity in a very short space of time in the utility vertical. And we can recognize that a big part of that is going to be delivered by either private or public LTE-based systems, or potentially hybrids of those as well. This is just a real quick summary of how we got to where we are now from a standing start back in 2019, when utility members were saying, well, what's 5G? Is it just going to be another version of 3G and 4G, which in many instances seemed to promise the earth, and then, without wishing to insult anyone, failed to deliver on the promises that were made. At least in the utility sector, that was often the case. And so people's expectations were raised to a level that couldn't be achieved. We then proceeded to author and produce a white paper to share with the utility community. You can find that on the EUTC website. It's still there for download. And then, of course, began engagement in this type of forum. I think the first event was at the Marriott Hotel in Brussels around Valentine's Day, February of last year. We started to bump into automotive guys, manufacturing guys, and so on, and find out what's happening. We held our own internal 5G workshop in Brussels last June to advance things further. And of course, we were all at the, or many of us were at the physical meeting in Rome last summer as well. This all sounds very quick, but a lot of activity had to take in the background for us to eventually actually become, through our ETSI participation, become full 3GP members in October this year. Okay, so we were actively participating in 3GPP and supporting some other work items which were being proposed by Samsung and Nokia and some of the other power companies around the globe. But of course, now we're able to engage in these direct activities and study items under our own steam. And of course, we recognise very much that there are synergies here with other mission critical requirements, such as the rail sector, medicine, manufacturing, and so on. For that very reason, actually, we work very closely with the 450 MHz Alliance and TCCA, the Critical Communications Alliance. So we can see there at the bottom, of course, all those items. You're probably a little bit too small to read the individual agenda items, but on the right-hand side of the slide there are probably about a dozen individual work activities specific to the utility sector, and they were proposed by a combination of, I think, China State Grid, ZTE, Nokia, EUTC, Samsung, and various others. And of course, this is just the beginning of the journey. We realise that there are many more significant activities that we need to do. We're only just at the start of this process. Okay, so something else that we are considering here in the utility sector more widely is not only that utilities can be an end user of 5G delivered services, and that undoubtedly will take place as we develop enhanced capability and functionality within the LTE standards. But of course, that utilities may wish to become a proactive participant in the build out and deployment of these networks. So just indicating in this slide that some of the challenges from the mobile operators themselves are how to make the business case work for 5G, given the much higher frequencies that are involved, given the densification that's required in access sites. And of course, what utilities have got in many instances is a vast array of physical infrastructure. There's power almost everywhere, and of course the utilities are supplying that power. There's vertical estate, whether those are power poles or community systems supporting street lighting or whatever it may be, and in many cases fibre transmission for backhaul in these areas. So it's just a comment that we thought was worth exploring here, and certainly the 5G experts, various 5G experts group, are aware that utilities are being encouraged very significantly to open up their infrastructure, not just in a passive way by merely granting a way leave or a right of access for a fibre optic cable, but actually could become active participants in this, in the facilitation of the future deployment of 5G networks. Utility community, yes, we're very willing and enthusiastic to get involved with 3GP development. It's somewhat difficult for us because utilities are heavily regulated and telecommunications isn't currently considered a core activity for, say, a gas or electric utility. There's already a good understanding of the LTE standards and what its limitations are, but we're interested to know how we can advance this and improve it for the future 5G and 6G rollouts. There's going to be investment required in standards and deployed infrastructure as well for private use of 5G technology. We can't succeed in gaining the ubiquitous coverage, the power autonomy and reliability that utilities need for smart grids without spending some money. It's just not going to happen. So there's a gradual recognition of that. What we also know is that 5G and its successors are never going to entirely replace all of the other complementary technologies as well, whether that's power line carrier, microwave, fiber, or satellite systems as well. So we need to work out how we continue to use all these in a hybrid way, and there'll be work items, I'm sure, which will align with those in the future. And of course, utilities can help potentially the telecommunications operators in the deployment of 5G and 6G networks by more cooperative use of their assets. But I wanted to just thank all those who've helped us so far in dipping our toe in the water in 3GPP. So especially the guys in TCCA, Samsung and 450 Alliance and the team in Iberdrola as well. With that, I will hand over to Erik Guttman, I think, who's going to follow up on this discussion.
Thanks. So I won't repeat what others have said. I'll try and keep this short here. SA1 functions as an entry point for doing work by verticals in 3GP. Now, most of you are aware of that already, but what I'd like to talk about is how in release 18, which depending on how you look at it is maybe a third of the way or half the way or a quarter of the way done already in SA1, which verticals have come and how far have they gotten? So the rail and mission critical work that we see are somehow adding to existing services and requirements that have been defined. Smart station services provide very specific communications in one context. The rail work is an evolution of existing standards, and the mission critical work is to overcome a specific interworking problem. But mainly what I'm going to talk about is smart energy infrastructure. So what have we been talking about in this study so far are really 4 types of input. One of them are on energy services and their requirements. So in the energy sector, there are a broad range of services that are required in order to deliver these improvements that you see from smart energy. Of course, there are many ways of delivering energy without all of these enhancements, and we've been doing it now for over 100 years, but these smart systems allow for more efficiency, more stability, and more interaction with the customer and so on. So we're looking at the actual services that are developed in the field. Some of them are already being used and some of them are more theoretical. There are standards coming from IEC and IEEE primarily. Resiliency is another theme. We're working on particular areas for mainly protection and distributed intelligence. So basically moving information through the distributed system to make sure that the power grid is stable and can recover from problems. This requires very low latency, as you'll see in my next slide. Operations and management is a key area in which 3GPP interworking with energy operators is very important, and we've been discussing that as well. And finally, we're looking at communication functions that are needed, mainly security, performance, surveillance, underground access. These are more KPIs, but also very specific settings and scenarios for these kinds of services. What's important to note is that all of these things are unique to the energy sector, but there are commonalities, as you'll see in the next slide. Let's see how okay. So these are the requirements that we see now that are just kind of sketched in there. This is by no means the conclusion. This is by no means agreed by all of the parties who are involved. So I just put in my perspective on how this is going, just so you can understand how the discussion is developing and maybe see some common ground. So high availability is a very key area, maybe the most important of all of these. I note that for achieving something like 5 nines or 6 nines of reliability, you cannot just rely on the telecommunication system. You have to look at all the other aspects of the system. There has to be redundancy, there has to be implementation, everything has to work together. But in order for it to not fail, we have to look at the weakest components. For low latency, there are these protection services that require extremely low latency. Again, this is not just something that you can solve with telecommunications. You also need to have proximity of the computation of the actual application components with where they're operating. Management, again, is a very key area because management is needed today by telecommunication systems. But it all has to be done in a kind of a one-off, non-standard way where a particular operator and a particular sort of utility operator work together to develop these interfaces. But a utility operator might have to work with dozens of different operators in different geographies. And so this is really a pain. So this is to address that. There are regulatory issues, particularly for isolation that we're talking about. QoS requirements for various specific services, but also for the VLAN service, which is a common deployment. Density can be quite high, and there are specific implementation issues that we're not considering standardizing, but have mentioned. For example, a need for a backup power supply for at least 24 to 72 hours for telecom infrastructure. Because without it, distributed automation will fail, the energy system will fail, and hey, your telecommunications equipment will not come back online either. So these are an example of the requirements that we're developing so far. I want to point out that it doesn't stop in SA1, that the work to realize these requirements will happen in SA2 and SA6 and other working groups, which have a very, very strong showing of industry verticals. And so please take that into consideration when you look at the overall progress, that it doesn't stop with SA1, it only begins. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erik. That's really interesting to see you point out there some of the common ground and common deployments. And this is very much part of the work that we're trying to do together as a group of market representation partners. So now we'll change and move over to Jordi Gimenez from the 5G MAG Media Action Group. Jordi, the floor is yours if you'd like to start sharing your screen.
Thank you. So hello everybody, and thank you very much for this invite. So I'm Jordi Gimenez, and I'm here representing the 5G Media Action Group on behalf of our chair that couldn't make it today. So, well, we are a quite young organization, I think, compared to the others that have been presented so far. So I will introduce a little bit the topics that we are dealing with. So we are analyzing, let's say, the different opportunities that 5G may bring for the media industry. And this involves, well, you see here 5 main topics. So from content creation, contribution of content, let's say, for instance, you get journalists, and journalists get connected to the 5G network, and from the 5G network to the studio in order to provide well, interviews, to connect cameras, to connect microphones, all this sort of equipment. We are also analyzing production, meaning, for instance, well, I think it's clear that the more the coverage and the availability of 5G connectivity, well, it starts to make sense to include some kind of wireless components into the production workflows to enable, for instance, remote production or distributed production, so that well, you don't need to make a lot of physical, in terms of resources, physical investment in covering events. We are also having a look at what 5G can provide in terms of distribution and consumption, which is, of course, where the demand, let's say, from users really is. So basically, I would start first from 5G for media production. So as I said, we see 5G, and thanks to the qualities that it brings in terms of, for instance, high bandwidth, low latency, possibility for tight synchronization, possibility to leverage on edge computing capabilities, for instance, in certain areas when you go with your cameras to a studio, and then perhaps we don't need to bring a lot of cumbersome equipment. So in all these scenarios involving remote production, news gathering, outdoor broadcast, where you need a quick response, where you need to send journalists and you need to cover events, mainly unexpected, well, we believe that 5G and as I said, expansion of 5G connectivity can bring an advantage there in terms of reducing cost and in terms of well, being there at the right time and be able to cover the events on the spot. So for this, well, we are having a look at different alternatives or different technologies that 5G is bringing. Well, I would like to highlight the work that some of our members have been performing in the area of non-public networks, which we believe they will make or they will play an important role in the future. So from media production, I think our requirements are quite different to the normal capabilities of the 5G network. In this case, I would like to highlight that we require a high throughput in the uplink, which is something that normally is not the case because most of the consumption is performed in the downlink. So, well, we are having a look in our association at well, how are the different components that 5G can provide, when they will be provided into the network, what kind of devices, and I think it's important what has been said so far, for instance, in not ending up in silos. So if we can leverage technology that is being standardized for other verticals, and we can work on it, and we can configure these devices or these network functionalities for our purpose, I think that would be an excellent outcome for us in order to be provided with a larger scale of equipment and available devices. So, well, these are the different areas that we are having a look, and our members have been involved so far, starting in release 17. we had an injection of requirements in SA1 under the work item called AV Prod, Audiovisual Service Production. As I said, we have many of the requirements there that during the releases 17 work have been translated into actual, let's say, work in the different working groups, the different groups of SA and RAN. And well, I would like to highlight, as I said, these non-public networks where we have members heavily involved, and also on the well, some of the requirements were also or are also being treated in the industrial Internet of Things work item. So there are many. There might be more. Actually, I would like also to mention something that has been highlighted, and is the case that, well, we find sometimes difficult to track where the original requirements are being dealt with in the different work items. So I think that that's something that we want to track, and also to try to find out how we can help, if possible, 3GPP also on this task. For release 18, I would like to highlight some of the topics that have come from our members. So they expect further enhancements of in terms of non-public networks, in terms of inter-networking, to support, for instance, trusted access, trusted functionalities from the content production world, as this, well, we believe this will accelerate the adoption of 3GPP technology, especially when we cannot cut from one day to another the reality and the systems that are already in place. Also, roaming support for standalone non-public networks and different, perhaps, handover options or different roaming options between standalone non-public networks or public network integrated non-public networks, or also with PLMNs, so different models in which, well, with the same equipment and with the same, call it network address or identification, you can plug, let's say, the equipment on a different network according to what is available and according to the requirements that this network can meet. We are also having a look at the spectrum flexibility options. For instance, well, having a look at some approaches in Europe with ELSA, approaches in the US for the CBRS band, and so on. And another important aspect that is being dealt at the moment also in the multicast work is, well, that we expect also to be covered at some point is well, to ensure quality of service delivery for multicast service, because multicast service in this case is also important for media production when you want to redistribute content that is being produced on a venue, for instance, or on the spot. In terms of media distribution, I think we have here plenty of topics. Well, there is certainly a massive consumption of video that is already, I think it's already happening, and it will happen more, and even more with more quality. So we need to well, provide 5G technologies to be able to scale all this content appropriately, so that the quality of service becomes consistent, and that the content that is being made available by the service providers reaches the users in the way it has been prepared, and in the way well, it is intended to be distributed. In this case, we are also having a look at perhaps new environments where media content is distributed. We are having a look at the role that connected cars, for instance, or autonomous driving, and all these newer scenarios could bring for the distribution of and consumption of media content. We are having a close look to how to integrate existing terrestrial and satellite infrastructure into the network to explore the different possibilities. And indeed, also in terms of edge computing or edge caching capabilities, well, how these functionalities that will become available in the 5G network can be leveraged in order to, well, for instance, I think it has also been said to allocate well, artificial intelligence or machine learning to, for instance, adapt the quality of experience to the actual device capabilities, or to the different environments, and how to provide each user with the right, let's say, with the right quality for the content. I would say all the engagement in terms of from most of our members came in 5G broadcast that started actually in release 14 and has been finished in release 16. So this is the first standard that is able to meet all the requirements for terrestrial broadcasting using 5G. So taking the technology of 3GPP and configuring it in a way that, well, we can meet all these requirements that are listed here. In the meantime, we also see an explosion of what we call personalized media. So content is getting ready to be distributed into smartphones and into wearables, that it has also been set. So for instance, in smartwatches or whatever, cars, as I said, connected cars, and anyway, in any device and at any time, and even, well, mixing linear experiences or let's say pre-scheduled content, but also a lot of on-demand, right? And all this content, well, it needs to arrive to the end user in the right way. On top of these, let's say we are also exploring some scenarios in which, well, content can be replaced according to recommendations, in which content can be, for instance, targeted advertising, content can be provided to the end user according to the preferences or the needs, even, let's say, automatically without intervention of the user, but by getting data on how this content is consumed. So we have, well, the industry is evolving, and of course new things are arising. In terms of the work in 3GPP, as I said, in release 16, we have the work on LTE-based 5G broadcast that has been completed. Our members also started working on 5G media streaming architecture. I think that looks promising for the future. Initial aspects on virtual reality and extended reality have been covered. There is also an harmonization in terms of media formats, enabling well, CMA for enabling a hybrid MPEG, DASH, and HLS delivery through the 5G network. In terms of release 17, our members have been working on new radio multicast broadcast, on enabling let's say both in RAN and SA, on enabling multicast also in the 5G media streaming. This is being studied at the moment. There is involvement in streaming enhancements, including edge computing. So what kind of capabilities can be allocated in the edge, or what kind of capabilities can be incorporated here to enhance the delivery of media. 5G video codecs, non-terrestrial networks. And well, what our members expect from release 18, and maybe there are much more things that are not covered in these slides. Well, we expect work on satellite, continuation of work on satellite, for instance, integrating integrated access backhaul, enhancements in order to also bring multicast and broadcast support to the satellite components, and in the end, a continuation of the work on non-terrestrial networks that have been started. On the terrestrial side, we expect continuation of work in new radio multicast broadcast, and a lot of perhaps more topics that are still under discussion and that we haven't yet fully covered in our group. And we also expect more work on edge computing, on these capabilities that the network will offer in terms of distributed computing, traffic awareness, adaptation, as I said, of the quality, for instance, to device capabilities, to the network conditions, and well, all these call it ML or AI capabilities to, as for instance, have been said, to predict the required quality of service, which I think it's important for media as well. Just to finish, our association is not just looking at the standards, but also how to bring all of this to the market. What are the roadmaps and expectations from both well, from the different stakeholders, manufacturers, operators, and so on, and what are the required commercial arrangements in order to bring all of this to reality, because standards are not sufficient. And in order not to get things only done in the paper, I think we need to put some energy also on well, getting things done or bringing some certainty in terms of deployment. So basically, we are covering all these issues. So network, equipment, terminals, and also, well, policy and regulation in terms of well, regulation policy, spectrum, and so on. So, well, just to say that 5G Mueck is open to anybody willing to work on this media and 5G topic. So we will be happy to get members joining. And that's from me. So thank you very much.
Yeah, you have an interesting potential member in the audience, I think, this afternoon. There's a point in the chat, Jordi. Thank you very much. So without further ado, we'll pass on now to Dr. Christoph Thuemmler. So you can start sharing your slides, Christoph. We are actually getting younger and younger in terms of associations, because the 5G Health Association is even younger than 5G Mueck.
So, hello, my name is Christoph Thuemmler. I'm a clinical director at Helios Park Klinikum in Leipzig, which is a major hospital site. Let me start maybe by saying that for us as a 5G Health Association, this today is a kind of Hello World event. 5G Health Association has long been a wish from the EU, and there were many discussions about that, and when can we do it, and how can we do it. And I think these discussions have been going on for a long time. But finally, after many years, the moment was right, and we have basically established a 5G Health Association. And I have to say that, you know, we are by far not in the same position as comparable associations as, for example, the Automotive Association. I mean, you are in a fortunate position that you can discuss today already your involvement with 3GPP. I think this is something which still will take us a couple of months to establish access to 3GPP. We are involved in some groups, or for example, in one special group here in Germany that deals with the regulator. But with the German regulator, they have a working group for 5G, for the 5G context, the 5G AP. And within the Bundesnetzagentur, I've been working in that group for 2 or 3 years already. And many issues have been discussed that are relevant for the health domain. And now with the upcoming 5G Health Association, I will show you later the webpage of the 5G Health Association, and always bear in mind these are early days. We will now be able to start to tackle all of the issues around 5G and healthcare and try to bring together on a global scale the different players. And this is, you will realize that where our issue lies, you know, I mean, if you form an automotive association, okay, how many members do you have? You might have 300. There's car manufacturers and those people that produce the bits and pieces for cars. Or if you are a media association, you have the media players involved and so on. But bear in mind, in the health domain, that means you have to be open to the hospitals, to the healthcare providers, even down to the single GP practices, to the manufacturers of smart devices, and so forth and so forth. And you will see this is very difficult. And we are now in an administrative process of actually creating some kind of framework that will allow for all of these members to come together and to play together in a kind of reasonable way, so that we can still be creative and contribute to the next generations of networks that there may come. And let me just say a couple of things or show you a little bit where we stand at the moment. So there's two things that are going on simultaneously. On the one hand is the forming of the 5G Health Association, which is happening in Leipzig. Steph, if you go back a couple of slides to, yeah, that's fine. So basically, in Leipzig, on the one hand, we are working together with the university and other players in establishing this 5G Health Association. On the other hand, you can see here a view of part of the campus area I'm working in. So this is an area, you can see one side of that campus, 740 beds in there. And I will show you an aerial in a minute. But the reason why I believe this is now a good moment for us to start is that Helios, I don't know if you're familiar with my company, Helios is a private healthcare provider. In fact, it's Europe's largest private healthcare provider. So we have in Germany and Spain and also in Latin America around 200 hospitals and several hundred health centers. And we also have numerous occupational health stations that are looking after big factories and basically taking care of labor protection and work protection or basically health hazards in the workplace. So we are a fairly big organization, global organization. We are 100% daughter of Fresenius. And of course, we have a genuine interest now in the whole 5G process. On the other hand, you need to see that the health domain or the health vertical is just about to get interested in the whole 5G topic. And you might wonder why that is, but the reason for that is, I mean, building a health association is basically a bottom-up work. You have to basically integrate everybody and everything. And globally, health is heavily regulated on the one hand, and on the other hand, it is used to always work on the bare minimum of communication requirements, because you would always expect and you need to make sure that your hospital is working even under the worst conditions where you do not have anything anymore, energy or God knows what, connectivity. And this is basically where the health industry comes from. On the other hand, it is absolutely clear that due to the demographic process, I mean, our society is getting older and older, we will not be able to provide a hospital space for everybody who falls ill. So more and more people have to be treated in the periphery, in their homes, in doctors' practices, in nursing homes, and so forth. And I mean, there is the idea of the patient-centered care. So you have to somehow virtualize your care and you have to transport that to patients. And this is exactly what we're trying to do. And in this, and this is why I'm showing you this. And Steph, if you could go to the next slide, which is an aerial. See this area, this is our campus network. You can see that where it says Park Krankenhaus Leipzig on the lower right corner. And then you go straight across to Park Krankenhaus Leipzig Südost and Helios Park Klinikum Leipzig and Leipzig Heart Institute. So it's a fairly big campus. And we have now established, basically we're building as we speak, a campus network there, a private 5G campus network, which will cover the campus outside and certain defined areas within the campus. And this is meant to be a blueprint for us as a company, how we might want to explore 5G further. And we want to basically project that into other areas, in other workplaces, other countries. And we want to collaborate very closely with all the stakeholders that I mentioned before, especially with the big companies that are selling devices such as infusion pumps, such as pacemakers, such as all kinds of implants that you need to connect. For that reason, the state of Saxony, so Leipzig is located in the German state of Saxony. The state of Saxony gave us a basically funding for a project. Steph, if you go to the next slide, please. It's not a much, I mean, we are starting off here with 1.7 million to develop that testbed area, this 5G testbed area, where we then have some use cases running. But you need to understand that more as a condensation core. So we have already established tight contacts to other industries and other industry players, and we're going to top that budget up, and we are going to build a kind of sandpit campus for big companies that are developing devices. So our first and foremost interest, of course, is massive IoT. That is extremely important to us. But we are also very much interested in other qualities that have to do with security, that have to do with basically just maintain your connectivity under any circumstance. So we are going to, in the next couple of months, tighten discussions with other companies, other key players, and try to bring everything together. And then we're going to go into the different releases of the 3GPP, and we're going to review everything, and we see what may or may not be missing there. So if we come across things that we wish to improve or things that are seeming important to us, we definitely will then enter the discussion via different pathways that might be available. There are companies which we work with that are members of the 3GPP, and there are channels that we can use to communicate. If you could go to the next slide, Steff. Yeah, I'll just give you a brief example. I mean, this is what we're working on while we speak. And this is not, everything is not already done and dusted and assigned and finished, you know, but these are partners we are talking to. Everybody so far has expressed their willingness to collaborate. There is some things are already contracted, other things are still under discussion. I just want to give you a brief overview how this looks like. And as we have many companies actually based in Germany that are working globally, like Siemens Healthineers, or you see B. Braun, you see Biotronic, you see Fresenius, and so on. I believe that Germany is actually quite a good space to develop this kind of health association. But of course, the health association is open for any global player who wish to join us. And in the next months, we hope maybe by January or February to present some kind of way, some kind of grid for different types of players that will want to join us. So that might be city councils, that might be hospitals, that might be industry, and so on. And they have to be, obviously, we have to think that over. They have to be reasonable opportunities for everybody to join us. And if you could go to the next slide, Steph. Yeah, this is basically when you go to the internet and type in 5G Health Association. This is where you're going to go. So you find this webpage. We're still fiddling around with it a little bit. You know, there is the discussion. You know, how are we going to name it? You know that yourself. There's already talk about 6G. So there are discussions. Well, are we calling it 5G? Are we calling it 6G? Are we calling it XG? By the end of the day, I don't think this is really relevant how this is called. But obviously, this is a society that will be dealing with the next generation networks. And we now think, I think the health domain, the health vertical has arrived somewhere. And we are now going to push things in the direction where we need it from our point of view. One more slide, I think, is there. Just to show you, this is Thomas Neumuth. He is at this point in time the speaker of the 5G Health Association. And if there is any questions, or if you want to have some information on the 5G Health Association, please contact Thomas and he can give you more information. Or if you want to, please contact me directly. That is another way to get in touch. I'm very happy and very looking forward very much to working with the other 5G associations in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Yes, and congratulations on this major achievement. I'm just going to stop sharing now. I think we're running a little bit short on time, but we are just going to launch a very quick poll. So this poll is on breaking down the barriers for industry verticals. So in your view, how can we break down barriers to 5G for verticals? Is it by supporting them more in 5G standardization? Would it be through harmonized regulations, through more government support at any level, or through stronger partnerships between verticals and the telecom industry? And that's something that we have touched upon this afternoon. So that's quite a nice conclusion. So with that, without further ado, let me just share, so we have a background screen, the names of the panelists from this afternoon. So let's start then with Georg and Balazs. Based on what you've heard this afternoon on requirements for release 18, and we've already mentioned there's a tight window of opportunity there. So, you know, we might even start wanting to think about the next release. What practical advice would you give to industry verticals, and what support already exists within 3GPP? So I don't know.
Start.
Yes, thank you.
So I think what we see is it going very much in the right direction. The forming of new associations, people coming to 3GPP, getting aware of what we're doing, getting aware of our terminology like URLCC and so on, so that we really get the possibility to talk clear to each other, and that we also in 3GPP have a sort of certainty we are talking to the right people. It's better we have organization in the background rather than single companies that are coming to us. So I would say this is the right development. I also think that for release 18, what we see, we are pretty much, as I said before, settled, I guess. But the requirements from the verticals, I think they need to be worked out in certain areas more, as we saw for the utilities, but they're having a starting point now in release 18, but I'm pretty sure this will go on into release 19. And this is how we anyhow develop our things. We go from release to release to release and enhance them. So one thing you need to be aware of, it's always a long-term commitment. If you go to standards, most likely you will not get everything within one release. And another thing, what we saw, for example, from 5GAA, these enhancements to quality of predictive quality of service, that's not necessarily something that needs to go via the SA1 channel, maybe partially, but you have already a foothold in stage 2. You have already a work item there in release 17 on these issues. You can enhance on that in a next step. So once you are in, there are different ways to go further. So I would think this is very good. I also like that people seem to accept now the way we've chosen to work, and that it seems that this way is successful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Georg. In fact, I think it's applaudable as well that we're seeing more and more of the associations supporting each other, and their journey, and you know, I think this very, very much complements you know, their own efforts. So I don't know if Balazs is still online with us. Unfortunately, I can't see the participants at the moment, but I don't know if Balazs wants to add anything if he is online.
Yeah, sure.
So here, thank you, Balazs.
Yes, I think there's one element I'd like to reiterate, because I liked it very much that it was brought up. I think Christoph brought it up from the context of the 5G Health Association, and that is for the interested verticals and associations to start with looking at a gap analysis of what the current platform up until release 17 already provides. Now, that is not an easy endeavor. We know how complex the system is. And there are already 3 releases to look through, 15, 16, and 17, and maybe even some of the earlier LT releases. But it's an essential part to start engaged, is to understand what the platform already provides. And knowing from that point on, you can actually determine the ideal way to go about the Delta add-on that you're looking at. So I would very much like to reiterate and stress how important that step is.
Yep, thanks very much, Balazs. I think that's very important indeed. And I think this is where our work in the vertical webinar series can also help. I'd like then now to move to our industry vertical panelists. And Maxime, if you'd like to, and your colleagues also, Markus and Antonio, if you'd like to give us your takeaway from the webinar this afternoon.
Well, I think so. Without any, without being, how do you say, presumptuous. So 5GA has been pretty successful at putting forward its requirements and then making it happen within the context of TPP. So we are very glad that this happened, and we wish that it also happens to any other verticals, so that their needs are also fulfilled, and eventually 5G is really a standard for serving all verticals, not only automotive. What we could say is that it is not one day where you just fill in or give your inputs to SA1 and then eventually you get a standard. You have to put a whole strategy together in order to follow your requirements all along in the whole chain, and to do that. What 5GA was successful at is to make sure that within 5GA we have a lot of telco and IT stakeholders, and they managed to follow this through the members. So we are very thankful to our members that are present in 3GPP, and they know what 5GA was wishing for, and they try to follow this via their own contributions.
Yeah, I think that's important as well, that we also make it very clear that this is a journey, and anybody who comes into 3GPP needs to be prepared to make that, to go the full mile. And I think also looking at the common requirements, and you've done a great job, Maxime, in helping us define those across the industry verticals. That's a very important. We've heard a lot about that today. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into more detail. Michael, if you'd like to say, give us your takeaway.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. So I think this is already sort of a nice tradition to have this exchange between the industry verticals and the 3GPP leadership. And of course, there are probably many participants of 3GPP meetings in the audience. It's also very good to see that more and more verticals are getting active and get in the area of 5G. What can be seen is that there are different speeds in the different verticals, and it's probably good for 3GPP also to see this different approach to 5G, different speeds in developing use cases and adopting 5G solutions. And I think this exchange is very important to get a good working mode based on the experience 3GPP has with their releases and so on, but also being open to maybe some specialities in the industrial, from the industrial users.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, and thank you also to Andreas Müller, who chairs the 5G ACIA. He's also been played a very key role in helping us bring together the various industries. I'll pass the floor now then to Julian, and maybe perhaps Erik, if you would also like to give their takeaways for this afternoon.
Yeah, hi Stephanie. Firstly, thanks again for organising this event, and it's brilliant to see so many participants involved. I think over 250, something like that. To me, you know, the utility sector here is going through a real paradigm shift. We should remember that the energy networks as they stand have operated in the way that they currently do for almost 100 years, and it's never changed. But the changes that are occurring now are being driven by climate change objectives, agreements by the European Commission, by United Nations, and so on. So this is going to happen. This has to happen. The drivers behind these changes in the sector are very significant, and they're not optional or just merely driven by commercial aspirations. You know, there are various ways that we can solve this. The other way, if we don't use 5G standard technology, is to end up with fragmented proprietary solutions in different parts of the world, but that's going to be very expensive and not be very beneficial for consumers of energy at the end of the day. So I think it's been brilliant to get involved in this particular initiative. Looking back now to just 18 months ago when Michael Bahr and Erik Guttman and I met in Brussels, and think we've come a long way just in that short space of time. And of course also the opportunity I think that utilities represent in terms of being partial facilitators of future 5G networks. So I think the two key things that I would really like people to take away today: one, the whole spectrum access issue. That is a problem for us, but we've already seen significant movement in 3GPP with adopting the likes of band 87 and band 88 to accommodate the spectrum which is already available to utilities. I would suggest we may need to do more work on that. And the other part of this is to remember anything based around best efforts consumer solutions. Everyone needs to remember, would you be happy if your electricity was supplied on a best efforts basis, and that maybe it failed as frequently as your broadband or your mobile phone does? So these are the reasons that we need to drive these things through the sector and through 3GPP. I think, Erik, if you'd like to comment.
Yeah, and thank you, Erik, also for your support. Yes, Erik, the floor is yours.
Yes.
So I just want to answer the question from the other perspective, and that is, since I'm the only sort of 3GPP vendor that's presenting and on the panel, I think that a great deal of the support that verticals get is from us, from the 3GP community, and we should be proud of that, and that you know, it's through that partnership that we're going to succeed. Thanks.
That's a super message, Erik. Yes, I agree. Yes, and then to Jordi, if you could give us yours.
Sure. So I would take two things. So I think the first was said at the very beginning, this idea or this vision that 5G as a technology and as a network that can be reconfigured, let's say, to fit the purposes of many verticals. I think that's a good message, so that, let's say, we end up in a solution that can fit everybody. And another thing is, well, when I have seen the different presentations from the different verticals, I think we have a lot of commonalities. So I think it's interesting to see all these synergies, and even to foster more, I would say, the cross collaboration between the different associations, so that, well, as in 3GPP, that everybody comes there and you get agreement in the end on something that fits everybody. Well, to see also this from the different verticals, so that we end up in a global ecosystem for that can serve our needs. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jordi. Christoph, the floor is yours for your takeaway, and congratulations again on founding the Health Association.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, my take today on this is that especially the events that you've been organizing for quite some time, and especially an event like today, where the different 5G associations can interact and discuss, I think these events are extremely important, and we should really try to find a vehicle to maintain that in the future, because, I mean, of course, the 3GPP is the one institution that brings us all together, but there are a lot of issues that are not necessarily a topic for the 3GPP, such as, you know, trust and the public trust into 5G and these kind of things, which we need to talk about, and then the interaction between the different 5G associations. I think it is extremely important to discuss that, while 3GPP has a completely different set of issues and different tasks and focus. So to me, this was an extremely important event, and thank you very much for your effort, and thank you very much for organizing these events.
You're welcome. We're not going anywhere yet, Christoph. So let's just quickly do the last poll, and this is just about how well are we doing, because we always like to make sure that we are on the right track. So this webinar series doesn't stop here. It stops here for 2020, but we'll be back again in 2021. We might do something similar on this webinar, looking also possibly beyond release 18, at least on the SA side. And with that, I would just like to underscore that SA5 is also one of the groups that you might want to consider joining as well on the service management. We would like also to give you some deep dives in 2021 on the deployments and the standardization work in different vertical industries. So, you know, we're open to doing podcasts as well from next year, and we hope to continue. Before the end of the year, or in any case in early 2021, we will give you a full report on the webinar series we've done. This is the 4th that we've done since May this year. So and we've covered a lot of ground. We also did one on spectrum, but that's clearly a topic that also needs even more emphasis, but definitely looking also at the common requirements, and I think, and the collaborations and the partnerships. I think these are the key steps forward. So thank you again to our great panelists. We're sorry we couldn't answer your questions, but we will be looking at them afterwards in the Q&A report. So thank you all for joining us, and we're so pleased that the community is global. We've already reached over 40 countries so far this year. We hope, and we see that is also beginning to increase, and we thank you for your engagement. I think the last thing to say is to stay safe in this very difficult period as it continues to March 2020. But let's be optimistic, sorry, and be thankful that we do have a standardization for 5G that is taking shape and is very, very important moving forward. So thanks again, everybody, and we hope to see you again in 2021.